Postcards from a Dying World, the podcast. For more than a decade, I've reviewed over 1,000 books that are mostly science fiction, horror, and bizarro. This feed will feature bonus audio I have produced over the years, as well as a monthly digest of reviews based on what I've read each month, plus the occasional bonus material about my own fiction. Thanks for listening.
Hello and welcome to Postcards from a Dying World. It has been a minute since we did a Star Trek episode. We're gearing up for my 100th episode. I haven't even figured out what I'm going to do for it. I'm going to do something special, fun. But this is the first Star Trek episode we've done in a while because Star Trek's been kind of a little bit on hiatus. There was a little bit of time between Strange New Worlds and the return of Lower Decks. But now Lower Decks has its third season in the books, so we're back. And I've got my two Trek experts back in the house. Issa Diao and Sara Lynn Michener. I could give you guys an introduction, but you've been here a bunch of times. I think we should just get into it. But
get into it.
Yeah, let's get into it. Here's the thing. I'm gonna start from the bat. Like, I hate to be the negative Nelly, but I want to be clear before I say anything about Lower Decks that I am a firm believer that if I don't like something, I'm not gonna hush anyone else's mellow. I'm not going to tell people that they're wrong. One of the things I hate about current fandom is, like, for example, I'm going to give another example. Like, Book of Boba Fett was straight up garbage to me, right? But if you like Book of Boba Fett, great. Good for you. There was one episode I didn't hate. But if you like
the last one, or was it the one with the Mandalorian in the whole thing?
Well, that's just a Mandalorian episode. No, the one with the train heist I thought was pretty good. Yeah, I thought that was pretty good. Anyways, we're not here to talk about Book of Boba Fett. Yeah, we're here to talk about Star Trek Lower Decks. If you don't know what Star Trek Lower Decks is, or if you haven't watched it, then there's really not much point in watching or listening to this episode because we're going to spoil it. We're going to talk about it. That is, unless you're one of those weirdos who would just rather hear the discussion than watch the episodes, but we'll talk about it. So before we get to my thoughts, let's get some positivity out of the gate here. Sarah, what did you think overall of Star Trek Lower Decks season 3, and then we'll get into the individual episodes a little bit.
I thought it was great. I thought it was just as good as the first and second seasons. Like, I didn't really see a difference in either direction. Like, I don't think that it's better and I don't think that it's worse. So it's not so much positivity. There's a little bit of ambivalence there just because I feel like they're doing the same things. But there are little moments in each episode, I think, that I like the fact that it sort of still can surprise me, and that they are, like, it's hard to speak generally about it without listing specific examples, but they're definitely sort of subverting their own expectations a little bit at this point, which is good, because I think that a show like that risks kind of having caricatures instead of, because they're constantly jokey and stuff like that, and each kind of character has like their archetype, and so you really risk kind of not having any character growth. But I really like that they mess with that, and they're still playing with that, and they're still sort of having surprises for
us. Issa, what was your overall thoughts of season 3 of Lower Decks?
So I'm going to take you on a roundabout way to my answer, and I apologize in advance, but hopefully this all comes together and makes sense.
Oh, we'd love to hear from you, Issa, so it's fine.
Okay. So this could apply to, so generally speaking, there's so much content out there in the Star Trek universe, in just TV in general, in all the movies. There, you can't keep up with all of it. I mean, you can, it just is very time consuming. So in a sense, the bar has become much, much higher for what I'm willing to watch, or at least what I'm going to enjoy. And so I found that a lot of things that I've seen recently, I judge based on if I think they could have been better or not, more than maybe on their own merits. I mean, like, on its merits, Lower Decks is fine. It's entertaining. I don't mind. I had a good time watching it. There were a few things that I thought were absolutely hilarious. It's a little weird for Star Trek for me because it's not it's not the things that I love about Star Trek. It's not like the big moral questions and or if it is in a very like backhanded way. And it's more like, you know, a cartoon. It's like, well, it's a funny thing to bring up, but it's like watching an episode of Family Guy or something where, you know, it might be entertaining, but it's not going to be like this amazing show that I think about, you know, years later. You know, like there are like Next Generation episodes or original series episodes that I'm still thinking about, you know. I'm never going to be like, oh, remember in season 2 of Lower Decks when this happened? Like that'll never happen. Like it's just not that
Right.
memorable to me. And that's a super high bar. I'm not trying to hold Lower Decks to that bar, but I feel like it could have been better, and that sort of bugs me. Like they could have made a very memorable show on the concept of Lower Deck, you know, the Lower Decks basically. Like I love the concept, and I do like the execution. You know, so it's not like it's bad, but it's mostly just that it's very ephemeral. It's not really making a huge impression on me. That's my biggest complaint. It's certainly better than a whole lot of shows out there. And I did enjoy watching it. There were a couple parts that are absolutely hilarious, and I'm sure we'll get to that. I'll just really quickly, when they called out all the names of the California class ships,
Yes,
that just killed me. That was
as
so
a Californian, yes.
yeah, I was like, yeah, it's living in California that made it extra hilarious. You know, but yeah, so there's a lot of good stuff in there. I thought the biggest difference between season 3 and the previous seasons was there was less of this like insane amount of Easter egging. Like it was more, you know, they had a couple things in there, but it wasn't the first 2 seasons seemed to have a lot more, you know, whatever. I don't want to call it like fan service Easter egg because that's a little over the top, because obviously that's sort of the point of the show a little bit. But you know, there was nothing like the Tom Paris commemorative plate or anything in season 3. And maybe there was, and I just missed it, but I didn't. I found it more. I liked that it focused more on the 4 main characters, and for a new Trek show, that's like incredible that I can actually name the main characters. Like I you know, I've watched all the shows, and there's only Lower Decks might be the only show where I could tell you the names of all the characters. Which
I'm sure you could with Strange New Worlds.
No, I really couldn't. I mean, I'd have to think about it, you know. But
come on.
I know, you know. Okay, so off the top of my head, I know Pike and I know Chapel. And number 1, I forget her actual name.
Una.
Luna, yeah, that's right.
Una.
Una, yeah, of course, Una. Yeah, we even had I remember us talking about that, and they like how they canonically made that her name at some point or whatever. But yeah, like I'd have a hard time remembering everyone's name, and that might just mean me being old and having a horrible memory. But you know, but I think the newer shows tend to have a lot more characters, and I like that this one, you know, you have like some smaller characters, like Mariner's mom is kind of a smaller character, but the 4 main characters are really like the characters of the show, and I like that. It keeps it simple for an old memory issue person like myself.
By the way, I heard her voice on a vaccine commercial on Spotify the other day, and I know it was her, and it was really weird because I was like, that is the captain of the Cerritos. I know it. It was her. It had to be her. And I did, at least I could recognize her voice, and that was showing that I was paying enough attention. Right. You said anything else before I get into my...
I think that's my general take.
Okay, so this isn't that different from how I felt about the other 2 seasons, because it's kind of a similar attitude. However, for me, like the shtick is getting a little more old for me, because in the first 2 seasons, my feeling was that at least I laughed once or twice an episode, like really hard. I got a good, funny laugh. And there was at least, I don't know which episodes, but somewhere in there was an episode where I ended up on my phone the entire episode and just was not paying attention. And
was it the Bird Planet episode? It was the Bird Planet episode, I'm sure.
No, actually, I have a hot take on that one didn't bother me as much as some people. That being said, because I liked that it was doing something different. But
wild.
Yeah. However, no, it was one of the standard episodes, one of the first like 3 or 4, and I don't even remember what happened, but I just remember there was an episode where my mind started wandering, and I realized that I had to go back and watch it again. And I realized that I just like, and I was watching it late, sure, but it just that happened to me, and and that almost never happens with Star Trek. Usually, I'm locked in, and so I have to admit that happened to me, which is very strange and bizarre for me. That being said, the way I look at Lower Decks, my personal feeling on it is that I think they're trying to have their cake and eat it too, and it kind of bothers me. And I think more so this episode. Now I know that Mike McCannon has said that they wanted to make a show about Star Trek, kind of acknowledging that the people in this world watch Star Trek, like that Captain Sisko and Picard are like famous people, and they know those stories, and I can kind of go with that. But what I don't like about Lower Decks is don't tell me it's canon and then have people break the fourth wall where they like make jokes that clearly you would have to watch the series to know, like when a character makes a joke about a random thing from the original series that just bothers me, because if you can tell me it's canon and then break the fourth wall, I feel like you're having your cake and eating it too. And that's something that
let's explore that a little.
Well, because, before you go into that, let me just say my piece on that. The first couple seasons I just went with it and I laughed with it, but for me what's getting old is that like I just reject this idea that it's canon. I just can't. I kind of view Lower Decks, the way I can enjoy it is I imagine it being the comedy series that exists in that world. Like in the 24th century, Lower Decks is the comedy show that the people on the Enterprise put up their feet and watch this funny animated comedy that takes place in their modern world. And it's not science fiction, it's just a comedy show. And like my brain has kind of had to accept it that way. And that's just how I do it. Now, that being said, I am all for people who enjoy this. I am not saying it shouldn't exist, that people shouldn't be happy for enjoying it, because I hate that. Because, like, for example, the people that are just up in arms because they don't like the Rings of Power, it's like, when we talked about this before we started recording, if you don't like Rings of Power, just don't fucking watch it. Just, if I don't like what's going on with Lower Decks, then just like, I don't think about it 10 minutes after it's over. The only reason why I'm thinking about it now is because we had this panel to talk about it. And I have not gone to my Facebook to say like, this isn't canon, I don't like this. I don't do that. I just, every once in a while, I'll usually say like, oh, Lower Decks was funny this week. I laughed at this thing.
But I gotta ask about this fourth wall thing, because it seems like if let's assume, let's try to find some kind of like analog organization to Star Trek, and you end up, it's hard to do that, or to Starfleet, and you take something like the military, right? Let's say if you're in the Army or whatever, you get these junior officers, or maybe you go to like your officer academy, whatever, the Army Academy, West Point, whatever it's called. Big military supporter here, yeah, clearly. But if you go to the Naval Academy, or if you go to West Point or whatever the Air Force Academy is called, I believe it's called the Air Force Academy. You learn about all these people, and you probably study everything about them. And I think the idea that the Lower Decks people would know all this stuff about people in Starfleet is not a stretch at all. Like,
I don't have a problem with that, but there are times when they talk about they literally in this series, and I don't know exactly when or where, but I know they've said the names of episodes. They've said the names of episodes that were not. It's like saying the Corbinite maneuver. Okay, that's a thing that exists in the world, right? But if you say the name of an episode that is entirely like I don't know, like,
I mean, that seems like a weird line to draw. Like maybe the episode.
I know, but
the log entries.
I feel like the problem here is that you have a very literal idea of canon, and I have a very like LSD idea of canon, and I am so okay with there being canon and there being canon. Like there being different interpretations of what canon means in each series. And it's totally just meshes fine for me to have that kind of, like three-dimensionality of the idea. because ultimately it is a show. It is a series of shows. It is a series of TV shows that we now have had for multiple decades, to the point where it's becoming like a myth. Like, I've actually been super curious, like if at some point, the Star Trek idea will actually just be completely released from copyright, and if we'll just have like this explosion of fan fiction or something, because I feel like it's a big enough world that there should be a wild diversity of not just stories, but of different kinds of textural ways of telling those stories. But I think that
like the Orville,
like the Orville,
well,
yeah.
I mean, and the Orville's totally a good example of, Star Trek fan fiction. It's one of the reasons why I'm not interested in watching it, because I would be interested in watching, for instance, Star Trek fan fiction that was written by a bunch of women. And so like, but you have, I think that one of the things you guys are touching on is, I have never watched Lower Decks more than once. I have watched every other Star Trek show, also not the animated series, I'm sorry, more than once, because it's just, there's no point. Like, you watch it and it's almost like, it's like fast food. It's like you get what you need, you get the jokes, but there's really no point watching it more than once unless you're looking for specific Easter eggs, or trying to, if you want to, for instance, rewatch it because you want to talk about it or something like this. So I don't think that it has, I don't take it as seriously, but that also means I don't take the idea of canon as seriously. And that is a wonderful gift, because it allows me to just enjoy it. And I'm not taking it literally, where they don't have this world where, I mean, they have all kinds of things happening on the Cerritos that, if they actually happened aboard a Federation starship for real, there would be, massive implications. People would be locked up. Like, there's all kinds of things,
Right,
including like fighting and swearing constantly and things like that. And so, things are believable in that world that aren't believable in other Star Trek worlds. And that doesn't make it less valid, just a different way of looking at it.
see, but that's one of the things that I admit, I don't have a problem with it. They can do Lower Decks. I'm all for it. But just me personally, I like the consistency of the world. I like the feeling of knowing that I'm in the same world. I admit it. I feel that. And so that's why one of the reasons why I think some of the, like, for example, Star Trek, what was the last TNG movie that they made? Was it Nemesis? Was that the last one?
So.
That's the last one, yeah.
Yeah. See, like, they were all excited before they made Nemesis. They were like, this is a new era, and we're getting a non-Star Trek director to do this. And they got Stuart Baird to do it, who was like a very famous DP who filmed The Omen. And they were like, he's not a Star Trek guy. He's just a filmmaker. And then one of the reasons why that movie sucked is because it didn't feel like Star Trek. It felt like they were trying to make a shitty action movie, and like, it wasn't quite Star Trek. It wasn't quite a shitty action movie, a shitty good action movie, right? And so it was just somewhere in between. It didn't feel like Star Trek. And some of the times, my problem with it is it doesn't feel like Star Trek to me. But I admit that at the same time, I'm fine with it. But I also don't like that they break their own rules. And what I say by that is, and I'll use the example, even though my favorite episode of the season was the finale, and there were a lot of things I liked about the finale. Okay. There were a lot of things that we can get into later. But even though I liked the joke that Shax finally got to eject the warp core, that was like, like having to be like this big ceremony and everybody, and like, that's fine. That's funny. It's a joke. It's good. But it bothered me, the whole, like, he hears somebody make fun of him and he starts crying. That's just not his character. We spent 3 seasons building his character to be this Bajoran tough guy.
It's not his caricature, but that's the very thing that I was talking about when I was saying that they are subverting our expectations and building on the characters themselves. I like that. It's a feature, not a bug.
Well, but see, to me, it's like, it's convenient to make this joke here, so we're going to throw out whatever we built about the character. And as much as, well, I know you don't watch the Orville, but one of the things I like about the Orville is that even though they won't break consistency to tell a joke. Like that, all the characters, like they have certain characters who they build jokes around, and if they don't, and that character is always going to behave that way. For example, Gordon on the show is always going to be the one that's like, can we stop for pizza? Or whatever. He's the one that's going to do that. They don't just randomly have some other person say like, I want to stop for pizza. And my problem is that it seemed like they just wanted to have Shax have that reaction, and it just didn't make sense to me with his character. But I don't want to like.
So one more thing on the fourth wall thing. I've been thinking about it, and I realized that I really enjoy fourth wall breaking when it's done well. Sure. And I think Lower Decks is actually pretty good at it. Like, my favorite kind of joke in this genre is, in this season, there's some time when, like someone makes a joke about time travel, and they're like, wait a minute, we've only done that 4 or 5 times tops. Like those kind of jokes are great. I think there was a Buffy episode where they, someone gets kidnapped again or whatever, and they're like, oh, it must be Tuesday, which is the night the show aired. Like that kind of stuff is always, I always enjoy that sort of thing. So maybe that gives
fair enough.
Yeah. I just want to say that I think that Nemesis feels like very Star Trek, because Nemesis feels very much like a bad episode of Star Trek. Nemesis feels like every bad episode of TNG I've ever seen.
I really liked Nemesis, but I haven't seen it since it was in the theater.
I like parts of it. I love parts of it.
All I remember is the stuff. And
Picard makes that movie hold up because of everything they did in season 1, especially Picard with Data. It brought so much more depth to that movie. Like when it came out, it was very random. But like now that I rewatched, because I had to rewatch Nemesis because we got our pool boy into Star Trek, that I was like, oh, this movie is better after having seen Star Trek Picard season 1.
I feel like we could just take the whole podcast about your pool boy, but we can stick with Star Trek.
Yes, anyone who follows you on Facebook is very interested in the pool boy story. But
he texted me today about Sarek. He told me he was very amused that Sarek has had a different wife in all of the iterations, and I was like, yes, that's a thing. And he said, well, it just means that Sarek has a human woman fetish, and I think that means that you have a chance with him. So we were joking about it. It was great.
Well, here's the other thing I will say about that whole Sarek thing, though. The fact that he has different wives makes Cybok more believable. So,
right. I mean, this family can just keep expanding. Maybe he's in a poly. He's in a commune.
We've talked about this before on this show. Sarek's a hot mess.
He is.
Honestly, like for somebody who thinks, who's a Federation ambassador and all that, he's a hot mess.
I mean, someone's going to decide we can't watch
Sarek. I can tell you that Dorothy Fontana, that's one of the things she objected to. She took, I've read now the story treatments where she first invented Sarek for Journey to Babel, and she wanted him to be the most regal fucking person in the universe, and she took him very, very seriously. And in her Star Trek novel, she writes Sarek very I don't know. Anyways, I could go on about that because I'm like neck deep in DC Fontana right now. But anyways, enough on that. But I will say, like Nemesis, I agree with you that Picard made Nemesis better and improved it, and it's one of those things that, I don't know, but I'm old enough that I've seen every Star Trek movie in the theater when it came out, including the motion picture, which is one of the very earliest movies I ever saw in the theater. So I barely remember it. And I'm positive I fell asleep, even though I love it now. But I've seen every movie in the theater, and Nemesis, I was very uncomfortable watching that. And the only experience that I can say was worse was Star Trek V, which is a very uncomfortable out-of-body experience of like, what the hell am I watching?
I need to watch Nemesis again, because I really... all I remember, honestly, the only scene I remember is Data at the end. That's all I remember. The new whatever, the wiped whatever.
Ramming speed.
I obviously don't remember anything about the movie, but I liked it when I saw it.
All right, report back when we do Prodigy. You can tell us what you thought of Nemesis. Now, I will say one of the episodes that I really liked the concept of is the very first episode, Grounded. Now, I'm guessing, Issa, like, I'm sure Sarah and I have been watching week to week as it's been going on, but you tend to binge things up until the moment we start.
I started yesterday.
Yes. So it's going to be fresher in your head than ours. But one of the things that I thought was so brilliant about Grounded is that, and I know they've been kind of building all the season posters off of the movie posters. So it had this kind of search for Spock thing. And they kind of set up the idea that the lower deckers were going to have to steal the Cerritos and do all this. Well, what was brilliant about the first episode is that it was the most lower decks of the concept pretty much of the entire series, that the actual episode of Star Trek happened off screen because the whole trial and everything with Mariner's mom was the traditional Star Trek episode. That's your Star Trek episode. Whereas we got the weird lower decks mishaps when they were trying to do the Star Trek thing and failed. And that's what was so brilliant about that episode. The Boimler, like with all the women at the vineyard thing, was a little weird to me. I still like I'm uncomfortable about that.
Hilarious,
it's just a running joke. It's just like, it's one of the things that I think Lower Decks does really well, is like, it's just this recurring joke that all of these women are inexplicably interested in Boimler and he's completely oblivious about it. It's hilarious. And there's, you don't really need a backstory for that. It's just like a recurring thing. And I think it's hilarious.
Right. But I do think that the concept for this one is the smartest Lower Decks concept that they've had. And I just
I love that it was a raisin farm. That was hilarious.
Yeah. And that it did look like Picard's vineyard to a degree. That was funny. But like I said, I thought the concept was that one. I was like, oh, this is really smart. It's brilliant. And really sold the concept. And just as a like, I imagine them sitting in the writer's room and having the thought of, well, what if the Star Trek episode happened off camera? And then we just find out later. That's like,
I feel like they do that a lot. Like, I feel like a lot of the episodes have kind of been like that.
Yeah, to a degree. And that's selling the concept of Lower Decks, and that they're and like a lot of this, I'm gonna like remember some of them, but not really know if I'm explaining the episode correctly. I don't know if you guys have anything on the first episode, anything else, but can move on to the least dangerous game, which was the second episode. Them cosplaying and playing a Klingon board game. Very funny. That's the best Easter eggs of the season, because they were actually using sound effects from the Klingon board game and that existed in the 90s. And so that was super deep dive Easter egg, very funny. And the fact that they got the guy that played Gowron back to do the voices. I'm all for that. It was very funny. Other than that, I don't remember. I know there was the whole Ransom Mariner thing where but that part didn't interest me as much. I admit that the funny stuff with the Klingons, I kind of like.
I gotta say, David, I feel like I'm watching you like pick on a little kid. You know what I mean? like it's almost like we're at some like sporting event and some little kid, we're at like a little league game or something. The little kid has like tried to throw the ball and it was a pretty good throw, but it didn't quite get to the plate or whatever. And you're just like, God, that kid just can't throw to the plate or whatever. You know, like
it's fair. It's fair. You're right. Look. I'm not saying. I'm just saying. I think. Well, no, but
I will. I do think that
this
show would drive people crazy if they try to take it too seriously.
Totally.
Like if it would just. I can't even imagine how crazy it would drive me if I was super serious about. Like I am. I'm serious about Star Trek in that I think about it every day. I think about it all the time. I watch it all the time, but I'm not. The brilliance of the show is it exists to make fun of Star Trek. So you can't, by definition, you cannot take it too seriously.
Right. And some of my favorite moments, like besides the KLS sex helmet in season 2, which is the thing that I will always remember going back forever. But like the things like when they make fun of the Magatu and how everybody says it differently throughout the episode. Those are the things when they make fun of Star Trek that I enjoy the most. But it's funny because at the same time, it's like, it's also the thing that I kind of reject in my brain as canon. But at the same time, like if you make me laugh, I'll go with it. It's fine. And like, I guess what you're saying, Sarah, is you don't take it too seriously, and I don't take it too seriously either. But at the same time, like, you know, we've gotten one episode of Prodigy back already, and I loved every stinking second of it. And I just there's like a love in my heart that I have for Prodigy that I just don't have for Lower Decks.
Well, it's very different. It is very, very different.
Yeah. And then and to me, Prodigy feels like Star Trek. And to me, Lower Decks feels like I said, like a comedy that takes place in the Star Trek world. That's what it feels like to me. But again, I'm beating up on the little league kid, and like I get it, Issa, but anyways, so the third episode was the one that is Tendi and her first day in senior science officer training. Tendi is a great character. I really like Tendi as a character. She's one of my favorite characters on Lower Decks. I like that she's the Orion who hates the stereotypes of Orions, but has the fun moment where she gets to be an Orion. It's kind of fun. I don't know if it was that episode or another one, but
that was the Deep Space Nine episode.
That was the Deep Space Nine episode, yeah, which we'll get to. And then let's see. There's the Delta Shift storyline, which I thought was very funny. One thing I do like about that is that I always like when Star Trek actually looks at how the ship functions and how the shifts work and those things. Like if I was writing episodes, I would always be looking at, like, I would always look for little moments where I could talk about shift change or, you know, date, you know what time it is on the ship, those kinds of things. Like I love that. So I like that they had this, you know, and I thought the storyline of them trying to sneak through the ship was pretty funny. And you know, give some love to Matt Jeffries and the Jeffries tubes and where that all came from. So I thought that was fun. You know, but again, I don't have a ton to say about it. I don't know. Stop me if you guys have anything you want to say about these particular episodes, because otherwise,
I think it all kind of blends together very much. It's all very, you know, it's very forgettable, you know, and I don't mean that like it's bad. Just it's not. You can't analyze it too much because it's not meant. I don't think it's meant
for
to
the
be.
bird episode. The bird episode sticks out like a beautiful sore thumb.
We'll get there. We'll get
there.
That
was by far my least favorite.
And I knew that would be. And
I loved it because it was weird.
Yeah, we'll get there in a minute because I have definite feelings on that one. Reflections, episode 5 is the one with the Starfleet recruitment table. And that, of course, was very hilarious. And as somebody who's tabled for animal rights at a million hardcore shows, I like kind of, you know, felt like, which is, by the way, how I met Issa. But, you know, the tabling thing was very funny to me. And even though the whole Boimler losing it kind of thing, I don't know, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, if it seems in character or out of character or whatever. I didn't care because I thought it was funny. So in the end, I was with the joke. I just like that there was a job fair kind of thing. Rutherford as a character kind of grows a lot in that one. And Rutherford's very interesting because I like where he goes, but it's really funny because, and this is like a little thing again, you're gonna accuse me of beating up on the little league kid here, Issa. I can't stand Rutherford's voice, but I like the character a lot.
What don't you like about his voice?
So high pitched, and it drives me nuts. And just like he's always like, very happy.
Everybody on the show is like that, though. That's the thing about a cartoon.
Go back and look. I complained about that after season 1.
Okay.
Like even when they used the original actors, which they do constantly, they do something to their voices. Like I think they actually speed it up a little bit and change the pitch a little bit because a lot of them are barely recognizable.
Yeah. All right. So and speaking of that, that's a good segue into the return of Kira Nerys and Quark and episode 6. Hear All, Trust Nothing. I have mixed feelings on this episode as a enormous Deep Space Nine fan who like loves Deep Space Nine to the very core of his being. I was excited to see Deep Space Nine again. And I did love the whole storyline with Mariner meeting the girlfriend's friends was very funny. That was a very funny joke thing. Seeing Deep Space Nine was great. I loved the joke about let's just spin around while the music sways. You know, that's an example of breaking the fourth wall. There, even though I laughed at it, that is breaking the fourth wall because that's like talking about it as if you know the theme song,
Sure.
and it is breaking the fourth wall. So that's an example. I loved Shax and Kira fighting about who saved each other's lives more often. That was very funny joke in world. Kira is one of my all-time favorite Deep Space Nine characters, because she's a resistance fighter and all that. And so seeing Kira again, and I want like silver-haired Nana Visitor in modern Star Trek so badly because she looks so freaking rad right now, and she would be awesome as Kira Nerys. So like,
she looks like a fairy. She's one of those old ladies that is blessed with like one out of every 200 old ladies ends up looking like a fairy, and she's one of them. I love it.
Yeah, she looks fucking.
I'm gonna
cool.
Google what she looks like because I haven't seen her.
Yeah, she looks really cool, and they need to get her back in there, and we need to explore what Bajor is doing. There were some neat little things there that were smart continuities on that note. The fact that all of Deep Space Nine's command crew on at Ops in this episode were all Bajoran, which means that they have grown up enough that they can send Starfleet away and Bajor can take control of Deep Space Nine, which is like a little thing but means a lot in canon, which was cool. And this episode, like, you know, the Quark stuff didn't amuse me as much, which is funny because Quark had all the best comedy episodes of Deep Space Nine, right? A lot of them. You know, I mean, there's a reason why when even talking about other TV shows, writers refer to episodes being Ferengi episodes when they're comedy episodes. Like that's like a thing now. And so it was weird that the comedy didn't work so much for me with the Quark storyline, although it was fine. And but at the same time, there's a bit of me that's like, man, could we see Deep Space Nine in Picard? Could we see Deep Space Nine in a 7 spinoff on Titan A or whatever we get in the future? Can we please see Deep Space Nine again? A little bit more for real. I know, I'm sorry, you throw arrows at me for saying that, but I don't know. How did you guys feel about this Deep Space Nine episode?
Well, you know, I wasn't like a huge Deep Space Nine fan, unlike everybody else.
Boo.
And I always hated the Ferengi. I never thought they were done well at all. And so I didn't really care about
Deep Space Nine is the when they were actually taken seriously as characters, though. Like in TNG, they were just throwaway comedic value. That was it. And then, you know, in Deep Space Nine is the first time they actually did something interesting with the Ferengi.
And I never found out because I never finished Deep Space Nine. So I will at some point.
We gotta do that
every time. You guys just can't process the concept that someone didn't finish it. So I understand. I
understand.
I
mean, it's the first season of Deep Space Nine is really hard. It's really almost unwatchable. Like I don't know what to do when I'm getting our pool boy into all the Star Treks, and when we get to Deep Space Nine, I'm like, I don't know what to do because the first season's just not very good.
Well, I can't remember the first 2 seasons of Next Gen. The first 2 seasons of Next Gen are very hard to watch.
That is true.
Because they're more short stories. It's more forgivable because they're at least entertaining in like a campy way. But with Deep Space Nine, it's almost boring, and yet it's necessary because you have to get all that character development so that you understand, what happens and where people go with that. But
there are gems in the first 2 seasons of Deep Space Nine. Like Duet is one of the best episodes, and it's a Kira Nerys episode that is one of the best Holocaust episodes or Holocaust analogy episodes Star Trek ever did, and that's like in the first season, I think. It's either first or second, but that's when the show really started to get good. But I understand, Issa, and at some point
I'll get to it someday. I will definitely watch it someday.
Yeah, well, I think that requires an episode. Like if you get through, I mean, I would even do season by season with you if you.
Okay, I'll let you know when I have time in my schedule to watch the whole thing, but I will
force you to do it.
Okay.
I would do that because I am interested to see, because I think you'll fall in love with Deep Space Nine like everyone else does if you sit down and force yourself to watch.
I mean, from what I've heard, the ending is a lot better than the beginning. So, whatever. But I Googled Nana Visitor, and she looks awesome. I thought I'd accidentally Googled Annie Lennox, but no. That'd be awesome. They should get her on the show.
Yes. Get Nana Visitor back. And she's super active Star Trek actor as far as being at all the cruises and all the convention, so she deserves it. So on that note, Sarah, what did you think of the Deep Space Nine episode?
I thought it was great. I love Deep Space Nine, but I loved it. Like I stopped watching it when it first came out. I think I was just too upset about TNG ending around that time, and I wasn't super engaged again because the first season's not super engaging. I was absolutely one of those teenagers that was like, I don't understand, they're not going anywhere, and I regret that now. And it was really just years later that I got into it, and I got into it years later because of the internet, because I was joining fandom groups, because people kept talking about how great it was, and so because of that, I forced myself to watch it. And as soon as I got past the first season, I was like, oh, okay, I get it, and then obviously it, just gets better and better as each season progresses, and, beautifully so, absolutely beautiful.
I will say for me, like I didn't watch the first 2 seasons of Deep Space Nine when it aired, and I was in college, and I accidentally watched the season finale where there was the part 1 of The Search with Odo, and I had no context for any of it. I just watched that episode because I was bored, and I was like, I do love Star Trek. Let me see what this is. And I watched that episode and was like, man, this is really good. I got to go back and watch it. And so I did start like at a really random weird point at the after all of that, and was still able to get hooked. So it can happen.
I was excited when it aired. I definitely watched the whole first season. And I'm sure I watched more. I'm sure I need to go back and look at like the synopsis and figure out where I dropped off. But I never made it to the Defiant, but I watched like seasons and seasons of them on this stupid space station not going anywhere. And that was the main point about the show. Just that it wasn't interesting because they never went anywhere.
Well, where they were at was fairly interesting, as it was a post-Holocaust occupation outpost right outside of a post-Holocaust, but whatever. Anyways,
sure.
So they went back to Deep Space Nine and Lower Decks. It was great. Everyone should love and respect Deep Space Nine. Then comes a mathematically perfect redemption, which was the Bird Planet episode, as it will be remembered, with Peanut Hamper, which, I admit I didn't remember the original Peanut Hamper episode at all. Like, it was totally out of my brain. So at first it was just like, what are they doing? Yeah. And then it took me a while to remember, oh yeah, there was this episode, and Peanut Hamper, the character, just was like, I'm out of here.
Well, they showed it at the beginning of the episode. They
kind of did, yeah, but I didn't remember it.
I didn't remember it either, but it wasn't. Yeah. They did do it in the previously on. Otherwise, I would have been like, what is going on here?
Right.
See, I found the Peanut Hamper episode, the original one, very memorable because they are, again, subverting expectations about artificial intelligence, especially because they did all this stuff with Data in TNG, and it's one of the reasons why TNG was great, where they have this Pinocchio character that loves humans and wants to be a human and all of that. It is hilarious to have a robot. It's like, fuck you guys, I don't like this from the get-go. It's hilarious. And so for, the idea of revisiting that because it was such a great character and saying, yep, it's still a little asshole is, and that episode though, it was like, so there are every now and then there's an episode of Star Trek where you were like, am I on drugs? Did I take mushrooms today accidentally?
Like
was
Threshold?
There something in my breakfast? Yeah. So it was like one of those. It was so weird. I remember like people on Twitter were like, what did I just watch? What just happened? And that's great. I would imagine that if I wrote for Star Trek, that's actually the kind of reaction that I would want the most, because there's something really deliciously evil about that.
Well, if you watch my interview with Brandon Braga, you will see when he talks about writing Threshold, he not only says that, yes, I flew too close to the sun on that one, but he has a big smile on his face when he's talking about it, and he knows and does not care. He thinks it's hilarious that people, and by the way, he loved the animated version that guy did on YouTube. I don't know if you've seen it. You gotta see it. This guy made a animated version like in the style of the 70s animated series version of Threshold, and I'm excited that I was the one that got to send it to Brandon and get his attention to it. And like it was like 10 o'clock on a Friday night, and like he wrote me back like 5 minutes later and was like, I'm so happy to have seen it. Awesome. And said that he thought it was the best version, but and he did talk about that here on this podcast. So but anyways, yes, I agree with you. Like one of the things about this episode, I don't usually comment on Lower Decks episodes on Facebook or Twitter or whatever. I did comment on this episode, and my first comment was, I'm not sure that I actually enjoyed the episode, but God bless it for existing, for being so weird. And well, I'm a pretty secular person, so it's weird to say that, but bless its heart for being weird, because I loved, even though that I wouldn't minute to minute, I'm not sure I enjoyed it. I just so appreciated that it was weird and went for it, and I was all about that. And like the bird planet stuff, all of it, like fucking hilarious.
I wanted my money back or my time back. I definitely took nothing away from that episode that I liked.
You didn't like the fact that there was like a sex scene with a robot and a bird.
That's just not my sense of humor. Like that didn't do anything for me. And they rang that joke bell too many times in the episode too. So it didn't do anything for me.
The return of the voice of Jeffrey Combs, so adding to his like being all over Star Trek.
Also, I would like to say before we stop talking about the bird episode, my partner walked by when I was watching that, because it is a truth universally acknowledged that if you are watching Star Trek and somebody walks in who doesn't watch it, so weird as shit will be going on. And that is what happened. He walks in and he was like, is this for kids? He's like, this can't be for kids. I was like, no, it's not. And I had to explain the whole thing.
The repository for angry AIs that the prison for angry AIs is still one of my favorite concepts on Lower Decks, and I know they're going to use that later, and they're all going to work together, and they're going to have to, there's going to be some storyline with that, and that's hilarious.
Yeah.
Eventually, that's one of the funniest ways they make fun of the tropes of Star Trek. It's like kind of like those godlike beings, thing that just gets over and over and over again. All right, Crisis Point 2, Paradoxus. This is where we get to see the Sovereign class starships. Boimler's holodeck movie. I laughed a lot in this one. Thought it was very funny. It's where you
love the titles. The titles were great.
Yes. Yeah. this was one of my favorite episodes of the season partially because it doesn't hurt my canon brain that like they're making up this is a movie that they're making up, but also playing with the idea that the holodecks are always kind of going insane and all that. And it's very funny. So I enjoyed this episode. Any thoughts on this one? Because I thought it was great.
I liked it. I have to admit, I've completely forgotten about the first movie. So it was sort of like kind of like it's funny that I didn't even remember that they were riffing off a previous episode, but they did it well and it didn't matter. So
yeah. And I love the stand-in for Dr. Marcus, the Boimler, like having, no interest and bringing back the fact that his transporter clone was killed, which I think, by the way, is and I almost see. Okay, I have to explain this. There's this movie, A Perfect Getaway, and it's one of the most underrated thrillers ever made. It's on Peacock, so anybody can watch it on Peacock if you've got Peacock. A Perfect Getaway there's a joke in the movie where a character is talking to another character who he thinks is a screenwriter, and he says, "My favorite thing is movies is when there's the red snapper." And he's like, "No, it's a red herring." And he's like, "No, I'm pretty sure it's red snapper." And because of that, every time I go to say red herring, I start to say red snapper. Because it's a movie that hardly anyone has seen, people are like, "What the fuck are you talking about when you say red snapper?" And I just almost said red snapper. The red snapper. But anyway, everyone should see Perfect Getaway. It's by the director of Pitch Black and Chronicles of Riddick, and it's Timothy Olyphant before he was a big star, and it's one of the most underrated, most excellently written thriller movies ever. Watch Perfect Getaway. Anyways, the whole thing with his transporter clone being killed, I think is a red herring that we're going to come back to later. I think he's in Section 31 or something. He's doing something really, really cool. And eventually Boimler and is going to be confronted by his other cool self that's doing amazing stuff for Section 31. And I think they're definitely setting that up. But it's kind of an interesting thing to have him like dealing with, which also plays with the whole thing of that Riker seemed to not worry about the fact that there's a clone of himself out there, until he shows up on Deep Space Nine.
Hey, spoilers! Come on.
Yeah, 30-year-old spoilers.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, you'll forget.
I have seen A Perfect Getaway. I just didn't remember it, but yeah, I remember liking it. That's all I remember about it. It's been a while.
Great fucking movie.
Cool.
Perfect Getaway. Anyways, and then 9 was Trusted Sources, which is the one with the reporter on the ship. Excuse me, I'm just getting over. I had that really awful flu that was going around last week. And then with the reporter on the ship, we kind of have like the smart storyline where the only person who, the whole thing with Mariner being the only one that was actually saying good things, and then she's the one that gets blamed. Pretty good.
That was well done, but it was one of the least interesting things, I thought. Like they were just the whole I'm going to run off with the archaeologist just seemed very. It didn't do anything for me.
Well, the fact that she's working for Picard too.
That was cute. I like that.
Yeah. And then, do you have anything on that one, Sarah?
I was thinking also about that episode when I was talking about subverting expectations with the characters, because I really did think, they're like the first half of that episode, you really do think that, Mariner really did talk shit about everybody, because that's what you are led to believe the character would do in the first 2 seasons. You have and so it really shows growth and also a little bit of surprise for the audience to have, it play out the way that it played out. And in its own way, they're sort of commenting on the nature of gossip and the nature of, once you're sort of known for something, then you can get blamed. You can get sort of pigeonholed for, people automatically think, that's definitely something that Mariner did. And so, in its own way, it is sort of I don't want to say, I feel like it's giving them too much credit to say it makes you think, but it has sort of its own little societal commentary going on. And I really liked that episode because of what, the sort of Mariner twist at the end, and, just having her be those moments of being more genuine. And I feel like it is something that she would have done in season 1, where she would have just talked shit about everybody and then gotten into trouble. So it is sort of showing character growth. Like, I feel like Mariner and a couple of the other main characters have grown since season 1, and that they are showing us that. And that's one of the ways that keeps the show interesting. Yeah, beyond the jokey stuff.
And
what you guys will know the answer to this. Why is Starbase 80 funny? Is there some other canonical thing about Starbase 80?
Well, no, that was established here, but I think and by the way, there's a Starbase 80 Twitter account now that you can follow. That's really hilarious, and they just
I will not be doing that, but that's very funny.
Yeah, it has like
don't tempt me to go back to Twitter permanently.
It's not as
that's
good.
That's a great idea.
It's not as good as the Gultakat Twitter that basically just copies everything Trump says.
Right.
It's fucking hilarious. That is the best. So yeah, the Starbase 80 thing, I think, is just like the idea that there's like, I think it's just the joke that they established here, that it's just the worst. Yeah. I don't think they ever had Starbase 80 before, but
okay. Yeah, and it works in universe because it's just the idea that there would be a worse starbase. There would be, the sort of bad mall that nobody goes to anymore. Right. Like that's like Rolodex was great. That was hysterical.
Now, we've had rogue AIs, we've had godlike beings on lower decks. We have to have the bad admiral story. And the bad admiral trope is so deep on Star Trek that even though Admiral Vance on Discovery has been an awesome character, everyone suspected him as being bad from the beginning.
I didn't.
Well, yeah, I know. And I didn't totally either, but I know a lot of people did. So the finale episode, The Stars at Night, which is, of course, a pretty clever Texas reference. That I don't think everybody got but with the Texas class thing, there's a degree to me that the Texas class storyline kind of, it's funny because this episode I thought was great and I really liked this episode, but I there's a little bit of my brain that kind of rejects the Texas class storyline because we did that in the original series with like the whole episode with the ultimate computer that was running the 3 ships. We've kind of already done that one, but that's okay. I'll live with that. And but the bad admiral storyline was kind of funny, and I kind of like the part when they're like, "Why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? You don't need money," or they basically made the joke of like, and so there was that going on. I loved that all the California ships worked together at the end, and then we got that joke of like, the fact that there's an Inglewood. Ship is very funny to me.
Like every small town in California had a ship. It was great.
Right. Was there a Culver City? There was a Culver City, wasn't there?
I don't remember. I remember Inglewood. I remember Burbank. I mean, I'm sure they were all in there, like everyone.
Right. And it was the Tellarite captain that was standing on the chair was fucking hilarious. Totally. That made me laugh very hard. So there were lots of things in that I thought were very funny. I loved the archaeologist working for Picard. Great stuff. Excuse me. Very good stuff. This episode, Mike the Cannon, I think, is really kind of tying things together in what's kind of going on in the show and giving Mariner a chance to come back and be the hero and all that. Like that she tied all the California ships together. It was great. It was fun stuff. And kind of showed promise for where they can go with things in the future. And I love the idea that they're racing on a mission and it was a great scene that they lost because they stopped to do the science right and then proved that was a very Star Trek moment. And it was a very good, like, tip of the hat to the ideals of the Federation. and why the you know, that was just a really neat little thing, and I loved that. That was the thing. So any thoughts on the finale, and then we'll get back into some more overall thoughts of what's going on with Star Trek.
Sarah. I punt.
I enjoyed it. Like, I feel like you guys have to complain about something before I can defend it properly.
I liked it fine. I watched the finale. I timed my series to finish it right before we started this talk. Yeah,
I was expecting more of like a cliffhanger just because the last season episode ended with one, but
yeah, it was totally enjoyable. And when season 4 comes out, I won't remember anything that happened in season 3, and that'll be funny. You know, that's the level of seriousness I give this show. I do enjoy it, but that, you know, it is what it is. It's not supposed to be
it's
like
fast food.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Well, you know, that's a thing. And so the good news is, on top of this, is that, you know, we've got another season in the books for Lower Decks. They've already been working on season 4. We have a lot of great Star Trek to look forward to, including Prodigy started up again. And I loved the first episode of Prodigy. And I do want to put a shout out, since we've got Janeway back, that last week, Kate Mulgrew visited the Captain Janeway statue in my hometown of Bloomington, Indiana. I watched it live on Facebook because I couldn't fly back. I don't know if anybody saw any of the footage for it, but it was funny how emotional I got watching it. They had a flutist in a Starfleet uniform playing all the Star Trek themes on flute.
Oh, yeah.
That is so adorable.
When she was, they, you know, you could see Kate Mulgrew standing off to the side while she was playing the Prodigy theme on flute. And I swear I was like getting a little misty because you could see Kate Mulgrew standing in the background while this dork, and I say that in the greatest possible loving terms, is playing her flute out of her, you know, out of her mind, the Prodigy theme. Right, where she's playing that, she has the second parts that she recorded on flute playing in the background.
Now, did she have music, or did she know these songs?
She knew them. So
okay.
She had where she had recorded all the other background parts, so she could play the leads on flute live. And she had to stand in a certain way because it was particularly windy there, so you know it was live. And then the last moment, after she plays the Prodigy theme, which was great, she played all like the Next Generation theme and everything before that. But Kate Mulgrew walks out as she's playing the Voyager theme on flute. And I gotta tell you guys, I was straight up crying. Because it's my hometown. I was straight up tearing because it was such an emotional moment. And then, and I posted pictures there, Kate Mulgrew comes out and stands with the statue. And for me, one of the most heartwarming moments is when she saw the plaque that explains Janeway's mission and everything. There's a little picture of Jerry Taylor, who is the creator of Janeway, one of the creators of Voyager. And the reason why Janeway is from Bloomington is because Jerry Taylor went to IU and in Bloomington. And so they have a little picture of her on the plaque. And there's a moment where Kate Mulgrew put her hand on her heart and said, Jerry Taylor, put her hand on it. And she said, I wouldn't be here without you.
Oh.
And I was like, as somebody who loves writers and writers impact, that was a great moment. I wanted to shout out Mary Beth and Peter, who were the originators of starting the Janeway Collective. They're awesome people, and they did an amazing job. There was an enormous crowd out there, and Kate Mulgrew stood there for like more than an hour taking pictures with everyone with a statue.
Aww.
Yeah, it was really cool. It was very cool.
That's
and it
awesome.
made me even more emotional that we were getting Prodigy back, which was really cool. So I'm really stoked on that. And I just wanted to shout out Mary Beth and Peter because they're awesome and they did a fantastic job. And Peter was sick and wasn't able to actually be there. And it broke my heart that he wasn't able to be there that day after all the work he put in for it. But yeah, it was, if you get a chance to go back and see the footage from it, it's really funny and adorable. Great moment. And shout out to Bloomington, my hometown. It's awesome. And Kay Mulgrew said when she was driving around town, she kept thinking like, this is a really beautiful place. I wonder if did Janeway live here? Did she walk around these streets? You know, and so it was a really cool moment. So on that note, we're done with Lower Decks. So the next time we get together, we'll probably be Prodigy, but we've also got the next season of Discovery has had trailers. We know they're done filming Strange New Worlds season 2. I believe we're going to get Discovery before that. But
and Picard's on the way too, with a bunch
Picard
of
season
stuff
3.
going on.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
And I do have thoughts on that, and I want to get your thoughts on this and on there. When the trailer for Picard season 3 came out, I thought it looked great, but the cast members started to say things like, "Hey, we could make a movie. We don't not necessarily done."
Well, and Jonathan Frakes did that tweet to like, you know, make us curious, where he was like, "It might not be ... the final episode," and everybody was like losing their minds, like, what?
See, I'm of the personal opinion that if you can get a good send off with this series, you let it be the send off. And that's what I wanted to say. I wanted
that never happens.
Unless.
But see,
it's really hard to walk away from something like that, you know.
Yeah, and I'm so excited to have more Geordi and that his kids are in Starfleet.
Oh, nice. I haven't heard anything about it, so I'm learning it all from you two right now. So
yeah, well then I won't say much more, but
it's fine. I'll forget.
I just
they were totally headlines, like saying like Geordi's daughter is playing an ensign in the next season of Picard. So it's not really a spoiler, unless you're like not on the internet at all.
Yeah, and there's a scene where Picard is in the captain's chair and says, "Engage Ensign LaForge" or whatever. Nice. So, I mean, yeah,
I'm gonna love that. I mean, like that's what I'm here for. You know what I mean? Like I like a healthy dose of nostalgia in my track. Or I like something new that I haven't seen before.
Well, and a good friend of mine, shout out to Tom Bateman, who went and did the UCLA research with me. He used to work in an office that was shared with Terry, I don't know how to pronounce it, Milanis, who's the showrunner of Picard season 3. They used to eat lunch together sometimes because their offices were by nearby commissary. And Tom has said that Terry is the real deal and is a really great guy, and he loved talking Star Trek with him just at lunch. And I feel for the guy because he's been taking on everybody on Twitter and the people who just want to hate it. But I think he's great. I'm really looking forward to it. So Picard season 3. But if they have a good ending, I think they should just let it go. You know,
if you have a good ending, everyone's excited and wants more. It's so hard to quit these things. I'm sure they'll make a movie or whatever, you know.
Yeah, I think they need to spin off into a 7 show. That's just my opinion. But
well, it's the thing about what he said is, and partly why everybody was losing their minds, because he could have meant anything by that, and it is entirely possible that there is already a movie planned, and that the last season of Picard is supposed to end on a cliffhanger. There is, because they know that they'll make a shit ton of money if they do another movie, and it is entirely possible that he just means that they're going to pass the torch on to the next crew, and that we're going to get another Enterprise crew. Anything's possible.
Right. All right. On that note, any other Star Trek things we want to talk about before we go? Anything else? No, I
to watch Prodigy, but I'm gonna wait until a few more episodes are out. But I really enjoyed Prodigy a lot.
Yeah, Prodigy is super fun. Yeah, and
I'm very upset that I cannot get a plush Murph anywhere. Like we were talking about this on Twitter a couple weeks ago. A bunch of the people who are in Star Trek, and how like the people who run the Star Trek official shop don't seem to be fans, because they seem to be. It's like. It kind of feels like Kmart runs the official shop for StarTrek.com. It's frustrating. There's a lot of, and there's weird things like a lot of t-shirts will only come in men's, and it's like, come on, man. Do you not know your fans at all? And I wanted a plush Murph since the first episode of Prodigy. and they haven't done that obvious thing, and I'm really mad about it.
Well, on that note,
Hug it.
my Discovery hat, I would love to have a 1701 hat for the original Enterprise, and I don't know why there isn't one. Of all ships, you should have a hat for the crew
I'm telling you, idiots run this site.
I know they didn't wear hats in that particular series, but maybe they did on their off time, damn it. And, you know, if Discovery has hats, Enterprise should have hats. But and it could be from the Pike era for all we care, you know, because and then they can retroactively they can put a hat on Spock for an away mission. Come on, you can do it.
I think we could write in another
helmet. Spock helmet.
I think Spock had a lesser known sibling who ran a hat factory. So
there you go.
We can get that in there.
Exactly. Dorothy Fontana would be so angry, but it's an excuse for hats. So on that note, yes, a Murph plushie would be great. Yeah, and Zero is my favorite character on Prodigy. I just want to put that out there. I love that that there's a Medusan on the show. So great. And yeah, so on that note, Star Trek is back with Prodigy still, and so we will see you folks in 9 weeks or whatever long we've got for Prodigy. Thanks for listening, folks. The numbers on these Star Trek episodes have gotten better as we go, so people are listening, and I appreciate that. It's weird, people aren't saying anything, but I'm seeing that you're listening all the way through, which is interesting. You can hit us up, make comments too, because then we know what you want us to talk about next time. So if you made it this far, let us know what you like, don't like. You know, tell me I'm mean for beating up on Little League kids with Lower Decks. I get it. It's low hanging fruit, but and maybe we'll convince Sarah that just because there's some asshole Orville fans, you should still watch the Orville. It's still very good. Especially
is it the fans or the
creators? No, it's the fans definitely made it worse, because there was that whole thing for years where they kept saying that Orville was the real Trek and that Discovery was shit and stuff like that. But you know, it's Seth MacFarlane. His fingers are all over that show, and every time there was, I did watch the first couple episodes, and I was like, there's just too much good TV right now. There's too much competition. I don't need this in my life, and it's because there's too much Seth MacFarlane in it.
That gets dialed back as the seasons go. In season 3, I don't know. I mean, I'm not anti-Seth MacFarlane. Although I don't watch The Family Guy. I've never really been a big fan of anything he's done before this, but I really appreciate what he's doing with the Orville. And there's a lot of Star Trek vets there. David Goodman, Brandon Braga, Andre Bormus are all Star Trek vets, and they love Star Trek, and they don't like, I can tell you that they hate the antagonism that some of their fans have set up with the original Star Trek, because they still love Star Trek, and they don't appreciate that. But Seth MacFarlane wanted to make Star Trek. They didn't let him, so he made his own. And you know, and
they were wise not to let him.
I mean, so I have to say, I like Discovery. I like all the new Treks, but Orville is my favorite of all the new shows, except for maybe Strange New Worlds. But Orville is it's fantastic, and I completely understand why anyone wouldn't like it, because it's the Seth MacFarlane humor is just very.
That's the thing. You have to have at least you don't have to have a taste for it, but you have to just be able to, like, you know, you have to find it. You have to not puke it up afterwards, and it's just
Well, you should know by season 3.
That man is like the man equivalent of nails on a chalkboard for me, and so it's really actively annoying and irritating.
I would say that the nails on the chalkboard, I completely understand. And what's kind of crazy, and it's one of those things where if you watched it, you would see, but I understand why you wouldn't get past the nails on the chalkboard. It's also got great jokes, but then it also has some really stupid jokes. Like sometimes it's like,
the first couple episodes were like that, but it really does come down to a paradox of choice. There are
Did you get to
so
the
many shows that I have not gotten a chance. There were shows came out that I just started watching season 2 of The Great. I loved The Great. It was amazing on Hulu. And it just, because there was so much else in my queue, it took me a couple months to get to it. And I feel bad because then when, I have this irrational thing when like those shows aren't renewed, I'm like, oh, it's my fault. And then I'm like, no, that's stupid. But that's how it feels because it just, there are so many goddamn shows right now. It's almost irritating how much good content there is. It's hard. It's a lot of pressure to keep up with everything.
Now, Sarah, I'm curious, did you get to the Topa episode of Orville? Because that's where it comes together.
I think that's episode 3.
Yeah, that's the episode with the transgender, with the...
Oh, yeah. I did watch that episode. And to be fair, a lot of people who are transgendered did not appreciate that episode. So I generally look to the group, the in-group that they're depicted when that kind of thing happens. Like, does it have their stamp of approval? And it did not. So it was one of those things.
I will say that the transgender community came around with the further episodes in that storyline, and I specifically, I know like Jesse Gender was very pro where that storyline went. Like, who's one of the most
I do enjoy Jessie Gender, yes.
Yeah, and I know she really enjoyed what they did in season 3 with that storyline. So and I think that it definitely improved. But again, season 3 is where there are a lot of his original fans complained that that the humor was gone by season 3. And
I liked it more.
I heard that actually. I heard somebody say that, and it was the first genuine temptation that I had to watch it.
Sarah, you would very much like the Orville if you watched it without like Twitter or whatever and ignored all the meta stuff about it.
I did watch it without Twitter. I mean, at the time, you remember when it first came out, I watched it when it first came out, and most people were like, this is great. This is just like Star Trek. And this was before the hate started and everything else. And it was really just McFarlane.
Well, and I will tell you, if you watch my interview with Brandon about making season 3 of the Orville, he mentioned that in the beginning that there was a lot of pressure from the network to make it Seth MacFarlane-y, and one of the reasons why he fought to get to Hulu was so he didn't have the network pressuring him to do like Family Guy humor, right? Like that's one of the reasons why he fought to get to Hulu. Also, he just didn't want to deal with running times, and like he was just like, if we're gonna make a movie length episode, fine, we're just gonna do it.
I feel like Sarah, I understand the objection. Like I'm super annoyed by a lot of the humor. Like it's sexist in the way that like a little kid would be sexist, like it's not
which, like as a woman I'm already exposed to on a daily basis.
Absolutely. Totally. Like it's like, why would you want to watch
like that? Like what's annoying for you is painful.
I completely
deeply cringe.
It's also super racist in the same way. You know what I mean? Like
I believe it.
It's just like, and it's sort of like, I guess it's like one of those the good outweighs the bad kind of situations, like I completely understand why you, especially on initial viewing, would not care for it, but if you ever did watch it, I think you would like it. I think
I'll probably end up watching it when we have another dry Trek season, because it's inevitable. We had a dry Trek between Enterprise and the JJ movies where everybody was like, will Star Trek ever return in some form, and it's only a matter of time. Right now it's an explosion of Star Trek, but I feel like it's only a matter of time. Somebody's going to fuck up at some point, and we're going to see it maybe regress into oh, it's just for nerds, whereas now it's much more popular, but at least much more popular than it was when I was college age and high school age. But so anyway,
that's how I ended up. That's how I ended up. Like
when we go through another dry Trek and I'm desperate, then I will totally watch all of Orville and let you know.
That's how I ended up watching Stargate Atlantis and actually liking it, which is weird because I love Stargate Atlantis and I love Stargate Universe. Every time I've tried to watch SG-1, I cannot watch it. It's so bad. But for whatever reason, Atlantis and Universe worked for me, and I don't understand it. Somebody explain it to me. Someone else explain it to me, because I don't know why. But well, I do know that Stargate Universe is actually very good science fiction. They actually had hired John Scalzi and a couple other science fiction writers to consult them to be like, how can we be more science fiction? And and it shows in the show. So that's something. But anyways, we can nerd out all day. And we already have. And I appreciate anyone who listens. I can't help but put a little plug in for the Orville, just because I do believe it got better and great, and I like it a lot. Also, since I had Brandon Bragg on the show, his new show, The End Is Nigh, is super underrated. If you have Peacock, I love Bill Nye the Science Guy doing disaster scenarios, and everyone should watch that too, because that show deserves more love. And
do you think he would talk to me about Tuvix? Because I emailed the writer of Tuvix with a ton of questions, and I said, I have been wanting to write an essay about Tuvix and why all these people keep arguing about it. Like, it has been banned in multiple Star Trek groups, the topic, because the admins just cannot keep up with the fighting that happens when. And the guy agreed to answer my questions, and then I sent him 30 questions. And I did say to him, I said, I sent you too many questions. However, feel free to only reply to the ones that you find interesting. If you only want to reply to half, that's fine. I'm just interested in your perspective. And he ghosted me after agreeing to do it.
So here's the thing. You would not know this because it's the episode is promoted as the Orville, is Brendan Braga talking about the Orville season 3. But at the end of the interview, they'll have to fast forward through the whole thing. I asked Brandon Braga about working on Tuvix.
All right.
And
well,
so
send me a link to the episode, and I will absolutely scrub past. Tell me what number to start it at.
I will do that for you, because I asked him about specifically, are you aware that people still constantly argue about Tuvix? And he had a very funny reaction, and he talked about how that was one of the episodes he hated the most working on. And so it's
amazing.
Funny to him because for that reason. So yes, we did talk about Tuvix. No, I've got you, Sarah. I'm I'm like you. I've thought of the same thing. Why do people still debate fucking Tuvix? And I don't understand it, because Janeway was clearly correct. You cannot. Janeway did nothing wrong, and I do not understand why people are so offended. Tuvix was a creature.
Sexism. Any Starfleet captain would have done that. Would have honored his existing crew
beings
and the bodily autonomy of his crew, who had not given consent for their memories to be. Any Starfleet captain would have done, especially Picard. Picard would have had a lovely moral speech about it, and then we wouldn't. But because it was a woman, it is the Bengazi of Star Trek.
That's so true. It is so true, because the thing is that why would you kill two beings to become one being when the
basic Star Trek 101, guys? Sense. Come on.
Yeah. And that's one of the things I think we talked about, is it's so inexplicable that it's still debated. That there's people that are like, Janeway killed Tuvix, fuck that noise. It's bullshit. No, I'm all, so people are still debating. He's just like, whatever.
Yeah, no, I watched Voyager very intermittently. I did not see that episode. I wouldn't have known about it if not for the memes that I've been subjected to over the past, who knows how long. But yeah, very entertaining.
All right. On that note, I got to end on Tuvix. People want to find Sarah. How can they find you? And
Facebook now, because my future at Twitter is shaky, and I was always on Twitter for 15 minutes a day anyway. But so full Facebook girl.
Yeah. All right, Issa.
I don't know why anyone would want to find me, but I'm also on Facebook. So. You're welcome to find me on Facebook if you want to.
But you sang in one of the funniest hardcore bands in the history of the genre of hardcore.
Yeah, I don't know how much longer I can post on that. I don't know if people still remember that, but yeah, sure. Come find me on Facebook. Bring it on.
Clean fun. Yeah. All right. Folks, and yeah, I don't know. Find us when Prodigy comes out. So thanks for listening, and live long and prosper, all that stuff.